This is a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast.
Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan Ahri Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. And we have a guest with us today whose name is Ahri Tallon. Welcome, Ahri.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you for coming in. Now, Ahri, you are the coordinator for the Darling Downs Environment Council. Are you the first person in that paid position? Because the reason I ask is because I feel like you've really lifted the profile of DDEC since you've been here.
Yeah, well, thank you for that compliment. No, I'm not the first person. It's been around since 2014, and I'm pretty sure we've had a small amount of funding consistently to pay a coordinator since possibly 2016 or 17. So there's been a few people in the role.
So when you came in, what was kind of your real goal of coming in? Had you been in a job like that before?
Yeah, in terms of that kind of role before, I had worked at the Mackay Conservation Group back in 2012. I'd also worked in neighbourhood centres. I worked in the Mount Gravatt Neighbourhood Centre, and a lot of my work experience has been in small community organisations or in the charity sector more broadly. Although I'd been doing youth work for the last 6 years, working with youth at risk in residential care and then setting up a alternative kind of mentoring and skills development kind of program to young men who weren't really fitting into school too well in northern New South Wales. Prior to that, most of my experience was within organising advocacy roles around environmental and social justice issues.
Well, I really want to delve into that because you have quite an extensive history as a activist, don't you? And that's the sort of thing I love and the passion. But just tell me, when you came into the job at DDEC, what was your sort of main focus? What were you thinking, I'm going to focus on this?
Well, I suppose it was a focus to not so much an issue or an outcome, but a process, a focus on community participation. Yeah, increasing volunteer involvement, increasing the level of support for member groups and for people who want to, do something for the environment in our community, and, helping to connect those people and really build a bit of a community and a sense of a movement with a positive culture that people feel like they've got a sense of belonging and, they're appreciated. And I think that's that social goal of helping to create a space and an organisation where there's lots of contributions from diverse places on lots of different issues. And my role is to really help facilitate and empower and support people.
So just for the listeners who've never heard of the Darling Downs Environment Council, explain what it is. So you're sort of saying that you are coordinating all these various groups. Like, what sort of groups have you got and what sort of things are they doing specifically? I
only coordinate the Darling Downs Environment Council group, but we've got over 24 member groups. And some of them, like the Permaculture Group in Toowoomba or the High Countries Koala Action Group, BirdLife Toowoomba, all sorts of different groups caring for the environment, appreciating the environment and trying to protect it. And DDEC, along with 7 or so other regional conservation groups around Queensland. We get a small amount of funding from the state government to act as the kind of regional facilitators or voices for environmental issues and community engagement in those issues and connection to nature. That's our role. We go to Brisbane twice a year to have meetings with the Department of Environment and the Environment Minister and raise different issues that the community's expressed concern about. And beyond that, it's community work, building community capacity and advocating on issues of concern to the community.
Do you find that the interest in the environment, for want of a better way of expressing it, is becoming more pertinent now than it has been before?
It's interesting. I think, it's definitely increased within my lifetime. we've been on this journey, I think, over the last 60 years or so. The first national parks created, I think we're in like the 1920s and 30s. And then there was, that kind of appreciation of nature was really a growing part of our culture. But then in the 1960s and 70s, we started thinking about, what are we actually doing that's might be pushing nature to the brink, and you had Rachel Carlson's book, A Silent Spring, looking at chemicals and about deforestation, about whaling, concerns about the effects of nuclear radiation and the effects of Chernobyl and those other type of experience. And I think there was a key moment when they sent back a photo of Earth from space that really kind of helped make people realise what a precious, unique gem this planet is that we live on, and how there's only one of them, and we've got to make it last. And so I think there's a lot of love and appreciation for nature, and really deep down I think it's what connects a lot of people to a sense of something bigger than themselves, a sense of, for people who connect to an idea of God or spirit, it's really important in helping us to feel a sense of gratitude and just awe in the beauty of life and creation.
Beautifully said, Ahri. Well, I guess where I was going with that questioning was, do you think that people's attitudes to doing something about saving our planet is getting more aware, or are people getting more polarised in terms of, particularly today is quite a historic day, and probably by the time this goes to air, the Liberals will have taken a position on whether they're going to adopt net zero or not. Do you think feel like sometimes it's one step forward and two steps backwards?
Yeah, it is. Change and coming to a shared understanding of truth is getting pretty difficult in our society. I think that we've got layers of that problem. I think to start with, and this is to kind of go quite deep in terms of the problem that our culture that, I would very much say is in a journey of recovery from the traumas of colonisation, from wars past, from violence in our families, in our communities. We've learnt to suppress a lot of emotion a lot of the time. And when we witness scary reports and statistics that share with us just how fragile life is on Earth and how easily it can be interrupted, as climate change very clearly indicates, that can really cause people to disassociate and suppress that emotional response of fear and anxiety. And so what happens on a cultural level, from my view, is that suppression and lack of space to share grief and feel the catharsis of shared experience and expression of grief means that we become quite emotionally paralyzed, and a lot of people feel like they fully know what's going on, or they did, but until they tuned out of the news, as a lot of people do, but paralyzed and apathetic and disassociated from what they can do or how much they care, because that's how they've learnt to cope. And so I think, we really lack those cultural ways and spiritual ways of fully witnessing the truth of what we're facing and creating space to emotionally hold what's needed to experience that, and then as a result feel the commensurate action. When it comes to how we explain and talk about and communicate, what is true and discuss how to act on issues, I think that's where it's more of an issue that's been developing with technology in the way that's interfering in our ability to have a public debate. From my perspective, social media has meant that people are being filtered into filter bubbles by algorithms, and increasingly polarized. Our media cycle is a lot faster, there's a lot less time for deeper conversation. So that's the most current aspect of it. But I suppose historically, I do feel that we're not having the deeper conversations that we need to in a community to grapple with confronting issues like the consequences of what we need to do in response to climate change, because we're feeling fearful, we're disconnected from community spaces where we can have those conversations. And really our political leaders haven't seen the potential of increased democratic participation and how important that is to maintain trust and cohesion, especially when facing complex problems that have got so many layers of interacting variables that we've never faced before. So that really requires a deepening of community involvement and discernment and participation and understanding of problems and the possible solutions in order to address the complexity of those problems. And so we've got this, I suppose, to put it on those, that we've got the emotional barriers in terms of our ability to confront, experience and see the issues. We've got the technological barriers in terms of how that's polarizing us in the way we're communicating. But then we're also lacking the leadership and social facilitation of how we can discuss things and figure out what the situation is that we're dealing with and what do we want to do about it.
I know what you're saying. I can partly agree with you, but I suppose what do you say then to people who say, oh, well, mate, Australia, we're one of the, well, why should we have to do more of the heavy lifting in Australia?
More of the heavy lifting in
terms of reducing our carbon emissions when we're not one of the biggest polluters. It's China, it's India. Why shouldn't they have to do more per capita?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that because per person we are the biggest polluters in the world. Our lifestyle is the most wealthy and resource intensive in the world. We're up there with, I don't know, like some oil-rich countries and people in Luxembourg, or I don't know the exact, but we're right up there. And from a moral equity perspective, how can we say to people, a villager in India or a worker in China, that they should do more because their country contributes more, when per person, wealthy countries like Australia aren't doing our fair share per person? So I think it's quite ethically dubious, that position.
Well, yes, I think you're right. You're on 102.7 FM. This is Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara Sullivan, and we're talking to the coordinator of the Darling Downs Environment Council, and his name is Ahri Tallon. Ahri, you say that some of the work that you're doing with DDEC, I know part of it is sort of working around renewables, and you say, what needs to change? Renewables done right. What are some of the things that need to change?
Yeah, essentially, I think a big part of the problem that we've faced over the last 5 years as governments have moved to accelerate expansion of renewable energy is we've basically allowed it to be a Wild West, free market cowboys. And companies are chartered to do in their constitution, have been interested in making a profit. They're not thinking about the community or environmental or economic legacy unless they're told to, unless they're forced to. And, it's a big challenge with every major change, is that politicians are often thinking about the outcome and not so much the process. And this kind of goes back to my concerns about the level of participation in democracy. Politicians are often thinking about the policy outcome and not the process that allows everyone to get there without tearing out each other's heads off. So what we're seeing is a huge need to ensure projects are placed in the right places, away from areas of high biodiversity and off land that is incredibly important for high value cropping. Generally, a lot of the projects in southwestern Queensland, some of them have been good, some of them have been not so good. The really concerning wind projects have been up in central Queensland. We've also got other issues around the way the companies are engaging the community, that they have been using non-disclosure agreements, which just really aren't fair in terms of creating trust and openness in the dialogue with the community about what's going on.
So do you mean by that non-disclosure agreements between landholders that
That's
they,
right.
same with the mining with gas and things,
Yeah.
you don't know what your neighbour's getting and
That's right,
what deal
yeah.
they've negotiated. So
Yeah.
someone with an educated child might, get a really good deal, and someone who says, oh, okay, yeah, you can have access as long as I get a new front gate.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah.
And that's starting to change. Like there's a company, I don't know which one, out near Dulacca, caused a lot of problems with the Dulacca wind farm between neighbours. And now is talking to everyone, get them all around the table. They've all got monitoring going on. They're all going to know what each other decides. So things are starting to change. Some companies, like Wombo recently, has been offering not just money to host, but also to neighbours, which is really good. But yeah, there's still more work to be done around environmental best practice in terms of making sure that projects are done in a way where they're positioned. Like there was a recent Australian Conservation Foundation report that said that we can preserve 90% of our best biodiversity land by protecting 90% of our best biodiversity by keeping renewables off 30% of land and basically pushing them a bit further west with minimal increases in transmission costs.
Talk to me, because that's part of the argument that people in rural, remote and regional Australia are paying the price with the transmission lines and the wind farms and things for something that is feeding the eastern seaboard, isn't it? Talk to me about the decommissioning, and because if I've heard once, I've heard it 100 times about the wind turbines that just being big hole being dug and then the wind turbines are put in there. Talk to me about that.
Well, so there's now under the state regulations decommissioning agreements that are part of any project. So that all has to have a plan that's agreed to by the host company, local government, from my understanding. Wind turbines are, not all of them that currently operating are, but new technology means that they are totally recyclable. That's been a challenge because the blades have got balsa in them, but the rest steel. But the reality is that a lot of them, unless nuclear fission or something turns up, they're going to be repurposed. They're going to be re-retrofitted. So it's not so much a issue that there's going to be a whole lot of waste left on the land. The waste, the materials, they're no different to any other industrial materials. The Meat and Livestock Association put out a chart basically classifying them along with any other degrading industrial debris, saying that you have to disclose if it's on your land. And the researchers show that there are no chemical hazardous to humans or animals impacts from either solar or wind. Solar panels are 100% recyclable. Currently, to fully recycle them increases cost by about 10%, and hopefully we start to see the infrastructure for that coming online in Australia over the coming years. A lot of panels have been exported after they've been used domestically because they've still got usage. We're upgrading the capacity of the panels on a roof or in a farm, and they're going to developing countries that can't afford new panels. So that's what's been happening to a lot of them. So there's some of the decommissioning issues. Yeah, it's a new sector, so there are a lot of issues to work through, but on the whole, it's a whole lot cheaper than relying on finite coal and gas that not only completely wrecks our climate, but also wrecks the land that it's extracted from, and is very expensive in that it's very much volatile and impacted by international commodity prices. We've seen a big reason we've seen power increases over recent years is because of the Ukraine war and the effects that has had on gas prices, and because of our coal power stations breaking down very regularly because they're aging. So switching to sources of energy that are renewable, if we can get a circular economy happening that recycles and reuses those materials, is a really smart thing in the long term. I'd love to see manufacturing of wind turbines and solar panels in Australia. That's what we really need to do for long-term energy security. So we need to prioritise those types of things and tax our mining companies accordingly so we can invest in those kind of things.
It's another whole argument about who's paying royalties on what. And of course, the research and development on battery storage is one of the biggest sort of stumbling blocks, isn't it? But tell me about another thing that you're working on, and it's about New Acland's request to walk back on its approval conditions for expansion.
Yeah, it's not a big focus area. It was more just a little comment in the media that we think that they need to stand by those approval conditions, that the members of the John Darien community don't want coal dust. They don't want those stockpiles nearby and the noise and dust that creates. And so, yeah, we were informed by local residents concerned about that issue and helped to give those concerns a voice.
And the request that they don't have to build the rail connection?
Yeah, well, that's pretty concerning. That was part of the approval for the expansion, and yeah, that has direct impacts on that community.
Talk to me a little bit about the Keep Toowoomba Cool campaign, because it's a good one, I think.
Yeah, well, it's tricky. That was kind of the first focus when I came into DDEC, because I felt like there was a real inequity between the level of tree canopy, across our township, and in talking to the community that was felt strongly, and frustration was felt as well. We had some conversations with council, and there was a lot of support for increased tree canopy. I think the barriers are more in resourcing within
budget.
Yeah, within council,
surprise.
and improving planning processes to prioritise those things. I know Nick Hauser has an idea that if we can reach our I suppose this is in a low or medium density housing scenario, that we can reach better tree canopy targets if we sacrifice a little bit of parkland space for street space to have trees, probably not as big as streets as what we've got in East Toowoomba, but enough that you can have trees on each side of the street and a kid can ride their bike one day down the pathway in the shade. So I think that's a great idea, and we need to move towards that. But unfortunately, the SEQ plan elements that set requirements for tree canopy have been removed by the new state government. Hopefully the local government, regardless of that, will see the importance. I know there is strong support across the councillors for canopy goals, but hopefully, yes, in the new planning scheme, we will see localised, time-based objectives around canopy cover, because I think that's incredibly needed. And a big congratulations to Andrew Reeson, who recently has organised community members in partnership with DDEC and done the tricky work, but big applause to Toowoomba Council for working through the details of getting the council collaboration to get street trees planted in an area of Harlaxton by the community. So using small street trees, the council didn't have to pay much money, and getting community members to water it. So yeah, hopefully we'll see more of those kind of projects and really see the community helping to improve Toowoomba's canopy.
Yeah, and they do have a million trees motion on the books at
Yes.
Toowoomba Regional Council.
You put that there, didn't you?
That's right. It's a lofty ambition, but the pushback was always that council or community members might plant these trees, but who's going to maintain them? Who's going to water them? So how have you sort of gotten around that then?
I think Andrew's doing a lot of watering. Hopefully he's getting some of the local residents involved, but it's a pilot, and yeah, it's something that we need to develop over time. We're a little bit tight trying to fit the planting in before it gets too hot. The next one, I'm sure, will have more build up and more engagement with the community to try and get more volunteer involvement and stewardship. But I think it's really great. There was a number of local residents helping on the day and connecting people who hadn't met one another before. So yeah, it was a beautiful day.
Yeah, and I mean, you say that is part of your focus for DDEC, is building community capacity, and it's true. I think we are known as the Garden City. That's our claim to fame, and it's our climate. So yeah, why wouldn't we be fostering that? It does seem crazy. So just talking about the spending of different councils, I know the Sunshine Coast spends something like 3.3K per hectare compared to us, who spend $637.50 per hectare on maintaining bushland area in Toowoomba.
Yeah.
How do you fight against that?
Although even those numbers are a bit generous, see, the way when we spoke to the manager within Toowoomba Council, I think there was just over $5 million a year in 23-24 that was going to management, mechanical, fire prevention spraying and facilities and trail maintenance. So although that was going to bushland areas, none of it was going to ecological maintenance. But then we don't know exactly how much of that Sunshine Coast number was going to ecological maintenance either. So we would have had to do a whole lot more work, talking to a whole lot more people. But the most important number in that report is that as an equivalent percentage of the total parks budget, Toowoomba Council only contributes like 13% to bushland activities compared to an average of about 26% and a high water mark of around 36% of other councils in South East Queensland. Currently, Toowoomba Council does have the Crow's Nest Nursery, which is a really great asset, and they do provide a small amount of funding to Friends of Escarpment, and they do National Tree Day, which is wonderful. And I think there used to be a Land for Wildlife program. I'm not sure if that's still happening, but yeah, there is no engagement of contractors to do that bushland restoration. I think the other low-hanging fruit, and we'll start advocating to council about this soon, is really providing a bit more support to organisations like Friends of Escarpment to recruit and market, because I think there are more people out in the community that could help. It's just a matter of getting the word out and making it accessible, and yeah, hopefully we can see more stewardship of people and looking after the local areas that are precious to them.
Yeah. Ahri, do you sometimes, apart from motivating the base, is to deal with the lawmakers or the rule setters, and do you sometimes feel like you're just shouting into the wind, or that you get that, oh my God, here come the greenies, we don't want to have anything to do with them?
Not really. I don't get too attached to outcomes. I value that I get to do work that's aligned with my values. Otherwise, it'd be pretty miserable. Looking at decreasing biodiversity and heat and all the figures and scientific papers, of which there's too many. And we know what's going on. We need people to take action.
Why do you think it is when 97% of climate scientists say that climate change is valid, it's happening, it's here? Why do you think there is that denial? I know you said before it's because people don't have the capacity or whatever.
Well, I think that the emotional blocker, that's more for people that accept that there's an issue. So that's kind of blocking them from acting. Acting like there's a fire outside your village, and, if you don't do anything, you're going to lose everything, which is where we're at on a civilization kind of perspective. So for people who are struggling to accept that there's a fire, that's a real tricky one, because we're raised to see things from the perspective of our values. We think with our emotions, and if we really value an idea that we are entitled to things staying the same, and that different perspectives about humanity's ability to influence nature, because perhaps it's more controlled by divine forces, perhaps there's another barrier to accepting it, or just seeing it as the cognitive dissonance, seeing it as too big an issue. So I'm just going to flick a switch in my brain and pretend it's not an issue, and just stay focused on pretending it's not an issue, because I really like the freedom that fossil fuels give us, and I never want to give them up. And I understand that fossil fuels are the most powerful energy source the world will probably ever know, which is exactly why we should use them very sparingly, so we can keep using them for very special things.
Very special things. If you've just tuned in, I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. This is Big Little Small Talk. We're talking to Ahri Tallon, who is the coordinator of the Darling Downs Environment Council. Ahri, I made reference to your lifetime of activism before. Now, I know you know Greta Thunberg. I think, she's only 22 and she's done so much already. But tell me about when you were at school. You were involved in, what was it, the Youth Environment Society at school, the Yes group. Tell me about, you grew up in the Northern Rivers. Yeah. Are you an anti-vaxxer?
No. No, I get regular vaccines.
I think the Northern Rivers was the highest anti-vaccine.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So tell me about where you grew up and in what family you grew up in.
Yeah, so my mum and dad both grew up. My mum grew up in Sydney, Italian family, came as tomato farmers around the war, and my grandpa was interned and then he went back to Italy. But my grandmother's dad was really hardworking. They were aspirational middle class people, and very much similar from my dad's side, who grew up in western suburbs of Melbourne and Williamstown. My grandfather was a metallurgist and into historic racing cars. Both mum and dad moved to Lismore to study environmental science. They were both kind of very passionate people in their family. And yeah, I think I inherited a fair bit of that. They gave me an upbringing that had a lot of contact with nature. My dad had a farm where he was using regenerative and ecological methods to grow food and build composting toilets as a side business. My mum worked for the council doing catchment management and landholder engagement and waste education. So I grew up doing land care on the riverbank most weekends and going camping all the time. And that exposure to environmental ecological values and that humans aren't the centre of life. We're a very special part of life. I like to see us as flowers. We're the ones that are able to honour and celebrate the beauty and miraculousness of life, but we are totally dependent on all the other parts of the system as well. And we are not greater or less than. And so coming into the world with those values really gave me a strong appreciation of nature, which really hit home when my high Catholic private school I was pretty lucky to go to for the last 2 years of school, because I was struggling in a pretty low socioeconomic public school with bullying and things like that. But Grandma helped me go to that school, which was a real privilege. Yeah, they took us to see An Inconvenient Truth when I was about 16, and I remember walking out of that cinema just shaken, with tears in my eyes, thinking like, this is kind of why my parents and all their friends have the values that they do, because, the last 200 years of industrialization have been amazing, have created amazing changes for humanity in the technology and food security and health advances, but it's also meant that we've come in out of balance with the natural limits that this earth has to sustain us and all of life. And we need to correct that pathway. And so basically since then I was on a bit of a journey towards trying to work with my school and the community and take action on environmental and social issues when I started to see the intersections with inequality and injustice, whether it be for workers who left behind because of the lack of planning for economic change, or for women and victims of violence, because we still have so much violence and trauma in our culture because we've lost that sense of community and accountability and belonging that we all need, but I think particularly men need. Yeah, so those issues and the repercussions they have, they've taken me in other directions, not just, away from the environmental movement in my life, working on a whole range of different issues as well.
So I do want to go back to your ideas about healthy masculinity, but just talk to me about who else was in your family. Did your parents have any other children?
I've got 2 brothers. We were a bit of a wacky Northern Rivers family in that I got one half brother in one direction and another half brother in another direction.
I think that's
it's
just
not
solely
that
for Northern Rivers.
No, it's not that unusual these days, is it? One brother's just finished his carpentry apprenticeship and the other one's a musician. I've got a sister who's a nutritionist up in Cairns. I got lots of family down in Sydney.
I know you went on to study business at James Cook, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I think you were in an article that I read online, and it was about the Premier of WA saying, what are these kids learning at uni? They're doing an activism course. And you said, yes, I have taken a course in public interest advocacy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience where, people think it's just ridiculous that you're doing activism at university.
At university. Activism is the outcome of values and critical thinking coming together. And there's a lot of values that are within university courses, whether it be values of caring for people in medicine or creativity in arts or experimentations within science or growth and stability within economics and business. And so the recent advent of environmentalism and recognising how economic and political structures can create inequality and adverse outcomes for communities because they cause us to be less in connection with one another, feel less safety, feel less trust. I think it's very natural that people learn how to engage and understand the political and economic systems that we live within and how to democratically participate. Because unless we democratically participate, it ends up just a wealthy kind of aristocracy who end up in parliament, really. The people who were born into it within their families or
inherited the seat from their father.
So we definitely need to empower people with the skills and understanding to navigate the political system. And I think that part of the lack of that education is why we're seeing so many conspiracy theorists, because statistically speaking, you're more likely to have conspiratorial tendencies if you haven't been to university. That doesn't mean that it's necessary to go to university, but it does mean that critical thinking is pretty important, and being able to understand and think critically about where information is coming from, who authored it, what's their agenda, what's their motive, is it reviewed, who's reviewed it, how they reviewed it, these questions that you have to develop to understand, to study at university and consider evidence and its veracity. So I think, it's very important that people develop those abilities and develop those abilities in relationship to democracy and politics, because otherwise they lose trust for our political institutions. And then, unfortunately, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that, governments are out to get them, that institutions don't have any moral framework or accountability to law. And we're very lucky in Australia. We've got an independent judiciary. We've got media, some of which is more independent than others. Some of it's quite vested interest influence. But we've got politicians who are also accountable to a degree of standards around accountability and transparency and ethical conduct. So
we have compulsory voting.
Which is an incredibly essential part of that system.
I think one of the saddest days of my life in council was the day that we had to get rid of the word smart city out of our corporate plan, because it meant that the government was trying to keep us all within 15 minutes of our home. And that's a conspiracy theory. And if that gets enough momentum and that's how kind of, we talk about the squeaky wheel and how that influences then policy. Well, that, was probably a very low day for me. Now, we are running out of time. I want to ask you about your favourite royal. Do you have a favourite royal?
Yeah, I was thinking about that on the way here. Have you ever heard of Emperor Ashoka or Ashoka?
No.
So he was in India, and he wasn't a very nice person to start with, but then he discovered meditation and he had a transformation. So under Emperor Ashoka, there was a big growth in the practice of meditation, as mindfulness practice across India. And he kind of, there's like a funny Funny saying, he said to his wife once, he said to his wife that I realised that I love myself more than I love you. And then his wife said, because she'd been meditating as well, I realised the same thing. Which is something that would be usually tantamount to getting your head chopped off. You love yourself more than you love the king or the emperor. But because they were both aware of their ego and that importance of loving themselves so that they could love the people around them, that went smoothly. And it was an time of expansion of India because nearby states saw that the systems and institutions that they had were working so well and creating prosperity and equality that they actually, without conflict, joined the empire of India at that time.
Sounds quite heavenly. A question that I did want to ask you earlier, because I looked up what Ahri means. Now, I'll give you a few options. In Sanskrit, it means luxurious, proud, wise, or to bring. In Korean, it means elegant, graceful, beautiful. And then, for the League of Legends, it's that mythological nine-tailed fox. Which one of those were you named after, Ahri?
My dad had a Jewish friend in Melbourne, so that's where I got the Ahri from. Ahri is also a biblical name. It's a name of one of the pillars of the Temple of Solomon. And in Hebrew, it means lion or king. To humble me, in Teutonic, it also means an ear of corn.
Which one are you? And are you a dancing man?
Yes, I love dancing.
Oh, do you? How great.
Yeah.
What do you love to dance to? What's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Lots of things, but the other night I had a good little wiggle to Pendulum's ABC News intro remix.
Oh, yeah.
And I just had visions of Richard Moorcroft dancing along with me.
Who's Richard Moorcroft?
He was the ABC News presenter for about 20 years.
Did he have that really sort of old Englishy type?
He had curly hair.
Okay.
Yeah, and he finished around 2002.
Okay.
Curly short hair.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Well, because yesterday was the 11th of the 11th, which was the dismissal. And so ABC was just wall-to-wall dismissal coverage and talking about democracy and how, it really sailed really close to the wind in terms of, whether that was constitutionally correct. And they asked Kerry O'Brien, in one word, how would you describe what happened? And he said, it was a coup. So I found it really interesting. It was 50 years ago, incredibly, whether we've learnt the lesson from how close to the judiciary and politics and politicians we are. But a lot of the commentators were the old ABC newsreaders who still had that sort of slightly plummy, slightly English accent. I wouldn't have thought you'd have much telly when you're putting in the hippie box, but I would have thought you wouldn't have had a telly down there when you were growing up.
No, we had TV, at Dad's place, it was under a tarp between two coaster buses with some fence posts and corrugated iron behind it and a sawdust floor with carpet when we first got started on his property. So there was a TV though.
There was a TV. Yeah. Now, okay, well, tell me that song again so that I can get Leroy to find it and play a little bit of it for us.
The Pendulum ABC News remix song.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. All right. Ahri, thank you so much for being my guest on Big Little Small Talk today. I've really enjoyed hearing your history and hope there's a lot more of activism up ahead of you in your career.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.
You've been listening to a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast. For more podcasts or to listen to live and local Toowoomba radio, please visit 1027.com.au or listen on iHeartRadio and Community Radio Plus apps.